Charles Darwin is a big fan of the Falcons offense.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, a.k.a., or I should probably introduce myself before I get into the AKAs. A little too overzealous today. I am Aaron Freeman, your very humble host, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this podcast. Thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer that goes strong with me, that makes it your first listen or first watch each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, I am joined by Joe Patrick, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for 92.9 The Game, and he's going to give us his thoughts on the evolution of the Falcons offense as we sit here in week 6 and sort of take a big picture look at this Falcon team now through 6 weeks as they are 4-2, and sort of, are they ahead of the curve, behind the curve, some of the areas of concerns that they may need to fix, some areas that are less concerning, all that and more. But Joe, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
It's great to be back, Aaron. I say this like with some other podcasts, but especially with yours. The only bad part about coming on is I don't get to listen to the show later because I am an everydayer. I don't know if you know this, but I'm an everydayer. So thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Appreciate it, Joe. Appreciate it. We always have good conversations when you do come on the podcast. And so let's see if we can start things off with a good conversation talking about your biggest takeaway from the Atlanta Falcons after their week 6 win over the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, and this kind of struck me talking to some of the players in the locker room yesterday, especially Jake Matthews, who really kind of spoke about it most clearly. But we kind of knew that this team could run the ball and, do some of the things that we saw in the game yesterday. We thought that was coming, but it hadn't really come to fruition until that point. This was the first time, I think the second time all year, the Falcons had rushed for over 100 yards. I think the other one was in that game against the Eagles on the road as well. And Jake was just saying the mark of a mature team and a team that ultimately is able to win divisions, win championships is a team that can evolve over the course of a season. Can also go into a game and maybe adjust their game plan. Maybe something isn't working that they thought would, or vice versa, and they can adapt in that respect. And I think that is what struck me watching that Falcons game, is that the passing game was decent, but it obviously wasn't kind of at the caliber that it was last time we saw them at Mercedes-Benz Stadium against the Bucs. But they were able to adapt, and they were ultimately able to really impose their will. Like I said, I think the first time, even though they were running the ball effectively against the Eagles, this was truly the first time where it felt like, the Panthers couldn't really stop the Falcons. And, it should be said, you got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, considering that Panthers defense and the fact that they didn't have some of their best playmakers, especially Derek Brown, who tends to, wreck games against the Falcons over the course of his career. But still, you got to go out and play the players opposite you. And I thought the Falcons did a good job of that. So, it's just kind of adding to the tools in the tool belt for this offense that they can kind of carry forward with them throughout the rest of the season.
So I'm curious, moving forward, when you look at the success they had last week throwing the football, the success they had this week running the football, are we going to get a game where they're able to do both at the same time? Moving forward, should that be the expectation for this Falcons offense moving forward?
You would hope that could be the case, but we'll see how things progress. I was actually talking to Chris Lindstrom about it this week too, because you hear coaches often talk about, when specifically running the football, they talk about the hot hand, which doesn't totally make a ton of sense to me with running backs. Like, I get it in a sport like basketball where you can have your technique down in a given game and the shots are just going in. For a running back, it makes less sense to me. But I was talking to Chris Lindstrom about, from an offensive line standpoint, do you actually get in a flow in the run blocking game where you just feel like you figured something out and you can, and he basically said, yeah, that there is that kind of feeling that offensive lines have from time to time. And so in that respect, I think that it's a lot to ask for, to ask this team to, rush for 200 yards and throw for, there's only so many yards that can go around, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, and you know this, like it's about being successful in whatever you're doing. It's not necessarily about the yards, but it's about how effective and efficient the offense can ultimately be. And I think in that respect, I think, yeah, like definitely we have not really seen that fully come to fruition, I think, on both in kind of in both aspects, the passing game and the running game. But I think that we're starting to see the possibility that that can come around. I think we're starting to see the way that they were able to utilize Tyler Algier in tandem with Bijan, I thought was the best that they had done that so far this year. And I think that that can maybe open up some opportunities for them and potentially, you know, exploit some weaknesses in their opponents coming down the line that they're going to have.
Yeah. And we'll see if the Falcons can do that. But we sit here atop a 4-2 record atop the NFC South. And I'm curious, Joe, to pick your brain on whether or not you thought the Falcons would be here at this point in the season, so we can have a little bit of a conversation about whether this team is ahead of the curve, at the curve, or maybe in some ways behind the curve at this point in the season. We'll do that to continue today's Locked On Falcons. NFL fans, start your season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So, you know, sometimes you get that hunch in the middle of the game. And, you know, if you feel like taking advantage of that hunch, just go over to FanDuel.com. The same place that you can place your bets is also the same place where you can find the latest stats and live play-by-play to help fuel that hunch that you have. And if you head on over to FanDuel.com right now, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you want to place that bet on the upcoming Falcons-Seahawks matchup where the Falcons are 2.5-point favorites, or you want to bet it on the upcoming NBA season or other NFL games, it's all there for you over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 10 million active members, because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Because unlike another apps, PrizePicks is just you versus numbers. Just pick more or less on up to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. And if you're looking to get in on this action because certain sports books aren't available in your state, don't worry, PrizePicks is. And withdrawals are fast, safe, secure, and you can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. So go more or less on Bijan Robinson or Tyler Algier's projected, or more or less on Kyle Pitts or Drake London. It's all there for you at PrizePicks. All you got to do is download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. PrizePicks, run your game. So, Joe, talking here about the Atlanta Falcons, and you know they're 4-2. I thought they would probably be 3-3 at this point in the season. Figured they'd probably drop one of these NFC South games, these last 3 games, but they were able to come away and walk away with 3 wins, be 3-0. You know, to me, that's certainly ahead of the curve when it comes to where they are in this division, and looking pretty good to, you know, if you want to be a playoff team, generally you want to win at least 4 or 5 of your games. Someone asked me, you know, when was the last time the Falcons went undefeated in their division? And my answer was, at least going back since the realignment 22 years ago, they've never gone 6-0 in the division. And so, you know, we're halfway there. So we'll see if we get there. But I'm curious from your perspective, Joe, where do you know, when you look at this team now at 4-2, atop the division, you know, 3 straight wins, their first 3-game winning streak since 2019. Do you look at this team as being ahead of the curve based off of what maybe your expectations were going into the season, maybe what those expectations were adjusted as we got into the season? Where are you at with this team in the terms of the big picture?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I predicted this team to be 4-2 at this point. Everybody does their little preseason. You know, you win this game, you lose this game, you win this game. It certainly hasn't transpired the way that I thought it would happen, right? I think that is for most people. It's like most people thought the Falcons would win their season opener at home against the Steelers, who were, you know, kind of there were a lot of unknowns around that team. And of course they lose that one. And then I think everybody's expectations kind of readjust after that game. And especially the manner in which it transpired was so ugly and gross, especially offensively. It was kind of shocking, but the team has obviously made a big turnaround. And the other thing is, I thought the Saints were not going to be very good at all. And I thought that was going to be kind of a game similar to playing the Panthers, where it's you one of those ones like you really should win. Ultimately, that proved to be an impressive win for this team. And I got to say, just when you think back about it, it really does feel like this Falcons team, the results that have transpired to this point, is kind of at the top end of the potential distribution of outcomes, considering, they had these kind of come from behind squeakers in a couple of games against the Bucks and Eagles. They obviously win a game against the Saints without scoring an offensive touchdown, which you would think you would never deserve to win a game when you don't score an offensive touchdown. So I think that they have been kind of fortunate in that respect, and probably looking back about it, I probably shouldn't have been so kind of rosy-eyed about the whole thing and being 4-2 at this point. But I do think that the team is kind of trending at a higher level than I thought they would be at this point. And a lot of this stems from that Buccaneers game and just seeing the way that the passing game was able to evolve to that point. But to see that, Drake London, like truly establishing himself as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL at this point is something that's really heartening to see. It was one of those things that you hope for, but you kind of never fully expect that kind of thing to happen. And the way that Kirk has been able to involve these other receivers, Darnell Mooney is obviously impressed, I think, more than anybody expected. As someone who was at training camp, and I know like people obviously weren't able to be out there, I got the sense that he was obviously going to have a big role in this offense, but not to this extent, like not to the kind of volume that he's been able to get so far. And so basically I say all this to say that, things haven't happened in the exact way that I thought, but if you look at it, I think that they're like at a level above where I thought they would actually be at this point, with the way that they're trending and obviously the way that they're sitting in the division now at 3-0.
Yeah. And, when you look at this offense, like I think you two sort of touched upon it with Mooney probably being ahead of where expectations were, Drake London, depending on where you thought Drake London would be as this sort of top 10 receiver, but he's kind of performing at that level up to this point. I know Kyle Pitts has been up and down. There's been a lot of concern about Bijan not necessarily putting up, I think, the level of fantasy production that I think a lot of people expected from him, being like the consensus number 2 overall draft pick in fantasy drafts and whatnot. But I think Bijan has played exceptionally well despite not necessarily getting the production on the field. Tyler Allgeier's played really well. Ray-Ray McCloud, I think, has performed up to expectations. And, Kirk Cousins, I know, was a little rocky there at the beginning of the season, but it does feel like, you got your skill position players playing at or near the level that they want to be. The offensive line seems like they're figuring it out after kind of a slower start than maybe expected, and with the injuries, and that hasn't necessarily derailed things to the degree that we were a little bit worried about. So I think the offense is definitely ahead of the curve. But, talking about that one player that tends to be very polarizing, let's talk about Kyle Pitts.
Yeah.
There's always Kyle Pitts drama seemingly every week. Even when he plays well, like he did against Tampa Bay, and then, had some plays in his Carolina game, but then had some other plays that he didn't make in his play. So I've already talked about it a couple of times, Joe. I've said all I needed to say on it, but, I'll give you the floor to, wax poetic, because I know you don't necessarily have as many opportunities to talk about some of these things.
Yeah, and I put a tweet out there with just like kind of an opinion of that play. And granted, my perspective on this was just sitting up in the press box. I actually didn't have really replays available to me at the time because I forgot my charger. So I was trying to limit my battery usage on my laptop. So I didn't have it open, wasn't seeing replays. But when I initially saw that play, I just thought, that seems like one where Kirk clearly expects, his big tight end, big athletic tight end target to go up and try to win a jump ball on basically like an alert, on I think a third down play or something with 10 yards to go or whatever it was. And it struck me that Kyle Pitts didn't seem to want to do that. Like straight off the get-go, I think he was just trying to read the leverage and probably thought, first of all, the ball wasn't going to come his way, but then kind of turned open at the near pylon, and instead of going to that far pylon, clearly where Kirk was throwing it. And to me, it just speaks to a frustration that I have, and I think a lot of people have with Kyle Pitts' game, which is that he just tends to kind of play smaller than he really should, like physically. It's almost like those dogs, like the people talk about dogs as like small dogs think they're a big dog, and big dogs often like think of themselves as small dogs. And he seems like one of those guys he just kind of doesn't win at the catch point as much as you think that he should with his size and athleticism. And so that's frustrating, but he is creating explosives like he did in this game. And I think that maybe it's just something that people are going to have to come to grips with, which is that he's probably never going to be, or he seemingly, at least in this offense, isn't going to be some high volume pass catcher like a Travis Kelce catching a lot of these little option routes and getting some yards after the catch. But he is probably going to have an opportunity at least to create at least one explosive, play in the passing game per game. And so that's just kind of you're gonna have to live with that. And I think it's more palatable considering the production that we're seeing from some of these other guys, Darnell Mooney, even Ray McLeod, producing a lot, especially on third down. So as long as you have other pass catchers and you're not feeling like the offense is limited because of any frustrations you have with Kyle Pitts, that's good. But it is. He certainly is a lightning rod. We were talking before the show started. There's one play every single game where people are going to talk about, what he should or shouldn't have done on it.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you're the number 4 overall pick and constantly people, look at you and saying you have to earn that draft distinction every single snap. And if you're not doing that, then to a lot of folks, you're like, you're a waste of space, all that stuff.
Right.
I won't get into.
Hey, Aaron, can I mention one more thing too that you brought up about Bijan? Because it's totally true that there's like fantasy football level of play and actual football level of play. And it's something that he mentioned in training camp about the kind of Christian McCaffrey role that he was going to have. I think a lot of people took that statement as, I'm going to be at like a Christian McCaffrey level of fantasy points. And I think that what he's doing so far this year is showing that he's like more of a complete running back with the way that he's been able to pass protect at times, and that he's like not really like split out wide, being asked to run a nearly full route tree like Arthur Smith was asking of him, which I think is helping him in some of these respects, especially in that pass blocking game. So I just wanted to reiterate that, he is having a quietly good season, even though all of the good things he is doing isn't necessarily reflected in his like rushing yards per se.
There you go. Yeah. So, as I've said before on this podcast and elsewhere, like I feel like he's the best player on the football team, but, it's not reflected in the stats in that regard. But, it's him and Jesse Bates to me are kind of neck and neck in that distinction. But we will talk a little bit more about the offense and the defense, especially because I don't know if the defense is quite ahead of the curve when we talk about that. So we'll sort of flip the script and talk a little bit about, some of the potential fixes to address some of these issues on offense and defense as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Basketball season is peaking right around the corner, and it's time to get back into the arena with Gametime. And Gametime has this new feature called Gametime Picks, and it's making getting tickets to see your favorite sports teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks is filtering out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And when you go to the Gametime app and toggle on all-in prices, you don't have to worry about getting hit with those hidden fees at checkout. And what you see is what you get, because Gametime has those panoramic seat views, so you can pick the perfect spot to watch Trae Young pull up and pop a 35-footer or whatnot. So whether you're into basketball, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Gametime is taking that guesswork out of buying tickets. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So here with Joe Patrick of 92.9 The Game, talking about this Falcons team now 6 games into the regular season. And Joe, we just talked about the offense a little bit, so I guess we'll put a button on it here. You feel, it sounds like you feel the answer to this is yes, but I'll ask it formally. Do you feel like the offense is where it needs to be at this point in the season? And if not, what do they need to do to fix that, to address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it generally is, but there are consistency things that they can improve upon. Obviously the third downs earlier in the season was a huge point of contention. They seem to have gotten over that. And again, with reps, that's really helped. In fact, I've talked to a lot of guys on this team, and they will kind of subtly hint at like not having had preseason as really being truly a reason why they were kind of so slow out of the blocks. And maybe not even so subtly. Like Darnell Mooney kind of just brought it up the other day without even me really specifically asking about it. And it seems like it's cool. It's all copacetic with the players and coaches. Like the players are just like, yeah, we want to play preseason, but they're not going to let us. And, that's just how it's going to be. And we'll live with the results. But I think that's clearly affected them. But obviously they're on the right track. It would be nice to see this running game just be a little bit more consistent. They haven't had opportunities. They haven't run a lot of plays early in the season. They just had so many games where they're running such few plays. I think before the Buccaneers game, they were near the league low. I think they were averaging like only 52 or 53 something per plays per game. And you're not really going to be a successful offense at that clip. But they've seemed to be improving that. And so over these last couple games, I think we're seeing much better signs from this offense for sure.
Okay, well, I'm asking the same question about the defense. Do you feel like the defense is where it needs to be? And based off of the look on your face, Joe, it doesn't seem like I think I know what your answer is going to be.
Yeah.
But if not, what do you think the Falcons need to do to address that issue?
So the defense is so interesting because before the Justin Simmons and Matt Judon acquisitions happened, we were kind of like teeing this team up as a team that was going to have hopefully, like a top 10 offense and have a 2022 style of defense, like a Dean Pease style of defense, where you just kind of limited the points, even though it was going to be ugly. And then you add those players and you think, oh, okay, well, now it could actually be a pretty good defense. Now we actually can rush the passer and create negative plays and create the turnovers in the back end. And the turnovers have happened to some extent, and I will give them this. And I know that you mentioned this too recently, but this team has been resilient in the second half. I was talking to a bunch of players in the locker room about this yesterday, and it's something that they clearly take a lot of pride in is the adjustments that they're making in halftime, the ability to take the ball away in the second half in particular. For whatever reason, it seems like that's when a lot of their turnovers have occurred. But ultimately, you can't be reliant upon Jesse Bates to have to, punch out a ball with 3 minutes left to give it back to your offense. Like that's not the world that you want to be living in. And so they've got to be more consistent, and they've just got to be better from the beginnings of games. They can't take so long to, I don't want to say figure out what other teams are doing, because I don't think that that's really what it's about. They're just giving up chunk yardage, and especially on the ground. And like when you're just giving up 6-7 yards on first down on the ground consistently to guys like Carson Strong from the Chiefs, like you're just not setting yourself up for success. And there's not a good reason for allowing that kind of production to some of the backs in particular that they faced this year. So it's clearly an issue. I wonder about, and I'm not like an expert analyst in terms of like being able to evaluate someone like Eddie Goldman and saying like, is he actually doing the job that's needed? But he's certainly like the way that the defense is playing doesn't seem like he is kind of fulfilling this role of being this guy who's plugging everything up in the middle and allowing the linebackers to roam free and make plays. So they've got to figure that out somehow. But if they can start to play more in the first half, like they have been in the second half, then I think they'll obviously improve. But so far it is unfortunately still looking like one of those 2022 defenses.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've already gone and charted the defense a day earlier for ahead of my all 22 breakdown, and I thought it was interesting that they kind of changed things up this week, and in some ways it worked, in other ways it didn't quite work. They played a little bit more man coverage than we have seen. It wasn't that effective based off of my initial charting, but those will be all topics that we can explore deeper on tomorrow's all 22 review podcast here on Locked On Falcons. So continue to make us your first listen. But yeah, like it is interesting that like this defense seems to be still trying to figure it out, and there's still a lot of football left to be played. I know there's going to be a lot of talk, at least amongst fans on Twitter and elsewhere. I've already been hit up a couple of times by insiders, basically being like, what trade do the Falcons have to make in the next 3 weeks between now and the trade deadline in order to resolve these issues? Do you feel like this is simply, hey, they're just, got to figure it out just kind of like the offense has, and eventually it'll click at some point? Or is this, a situation where the Falcons do need to be, buyers at the trade deadline and trying to make a move to try to upgrade, that side of the ball?
I actually do think it's more of the former, where like they have to just figure it out. Like I just don't think you can continue to just rely on, bringing in some acquisition that's going to, you know, be the magic bullet. The Deus Ex Machina just kind of comes in and fixes things. And, you know, they're already down some draft picks. So it's, they're running low on the draft capital that they even have left to kind of dish out. And anything that you do is going to have a knock-on effect in the future. And so I'm always very hesitant to trade away that draft capital for players. I obviously understand why they did it in the case of a guy like Matthew Judon, to bring in that quality of pass rusher on a rental. That seemed like a fair deal. But I've seen obviously the rumors for some of these guys, and especially as of late with the Max Crosby situation going on. To me, that just seems unfeasible and totally unrealistic. And I think that fans kind of get their hopes up too much over this kind of thing, especially this year. There are cases where it could happen. Like last year, there was clearly genuine interest and a real pursuit of Montez Sweat that obviously fell through at the final hurdle when the Bears kind of gazumped them for the deal. But I think they just got to figure this out, and that's what Grady Jarrett was saying when I was talking to him last night. He's like, we just got to keep working. We can't get down on ourselves. And he said, like, come the end of the season, we'll be glad that we didn't just kind of give up and get down in the dumps about it. But maybe that's an optimistic attitude to have, but certainly something has to change. And you would think that Raheem Morris kind of being a defensive mind and Jimmy Lake can kind of put their heads together and potentially come up with some things. And I think that it will help to get these three linebackers actually to get healthy together, because I think you can pair them up and in different ways that gets all three of them on the field. Again, I know you've talked about it a lot with getting Caden Ellis maybe on the edge a lot more than he has been, where he hasn't really been able to play for much of the last 2 years. That could potentially help with the pass rush too. But I think it first starts with the running game and just being more consistent in the run game on defense. That will hopefully set the table for everything else they want to do defensively.
I tend to agree with that. I tend to agree that a lot of their issues are early down issues. And they're not, I think they did a much better job in this Carolina game. So again, we'll spend 20 minutes probably talking about it tomorrow on the podcast, but it is, you saw in this game where I think I have the stats somewhere. Hold on. Let me look them up real quick. Somewhere in here. But anyway, basically, like, they had, I think, 11 third downs. 6 of them were third and longs, and 5 of them were third and short and third and medium. And I think there was only 2 third and shorts in this game. And the thing that has been prior to this game, about half of the Falcons' third downs have been third and short. And basically, I've mentioned before in the podcast where it's like there's a pretty good correlation between how good your third down defense is based off of the down and distance that they have to solve. It's harder for teams to convert third and long than it is third and short. And so with the Falcons having an inordinate amount of third and shorts, they have struggled. It's why they were the worst third down defense in the NFL heading into this game. And this week you saw they only gave up 1 of 6 third and longs in this game. And they gave up, I think 4 or 5 other third and shorts and third and mediums combined. But it was just like they were getting positive plays on early downs. You got some tackles for loss. You had some incomplete passes. You had some Panthers penalties and whatnot. And so it's just like, to me, that solves one of many problems that you have to deal with. Again, you're talking about the run game and whatnot, but it's like, hey, if we can just get into some third and longs, and that means we need to do better job on first and second down, that's going to benefit this team in the long run. So I tend to agree with you, Joe, basically to say that I think they have the pieces to figure it out. Again, whether this is going to be this top 10 defense that I think a lot of people thought they had the potential to be after the Judon trade and the Simmons trade, maybe that ship has sailed a little bit at this point in time, but certainly getting to a level where I think we can say that this is a competent to capable defense, I think is still potentially on the radar. They just got to tweak some things.
Yeah, and to go back to 2022, I remember talking to Dean Pease about this, where they had a very similar issue. They just left themselves a lot of these third and shorts, and he was asked about it. And I forget the stat that he's recited about, what the number is, like, that teams convert from those distances, but it was shockingly high. And he was saying one of the reasons is, like, even if you're facing a 3rd and 2, you're not like selling out necessarily to stop them getting that first down, because then you open up a whole different can of worms for yourself in terms of giving up explosives. And ultimately, this game is about limiting the amount of points. But then that ultimately leads to a lot of long drives. And I think that we've seen that kind of hurt this Falcons defense as well, is just being out on the field for too many plays. The offense not helping them at times this season, not playing that complementary football that they always talk about, and just kind of leaving them out there for too many plays. But if the offense has a part to play in this as well, in terms of, again, staying out on the field, limiting the amount of time that they have to be out there. And hopefully when you get those things starting to go in sync together, then you can get a better cohesive whole as an entire team, not just the defense.
Yeah, definitely. So, Joe, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your insight into this week 6 matchup and where the Falcons are at this point in the season. Let the people know where they can find your stuff and some of the things you're working on.
Yeah, if you're tailgating for a Falcons game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, you can hear myself and John Fricke on the radio on 92.9 The Game. We're usually on from like 4 hours to 2 hours before kickoff. So that would be 9 to 11 in the morning for this 1 o'clock kickoff coming up this Sunday. So that's where you can catch me. And just generally on 92.9, it's basically a Falcons station at this point. Now that the Braves season is over, it's all Falcons and college football for the most part. So lots of stuff going on over there.
You telling me the French fever has not caught up to 92.9 The Game when it comes to the Atlanta Hawks at this point?
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to all the French like catchphrases that we're gonna have around this team.
Yes,
it's gonna be fun.
Yes, I've been brushing up. I'm about to download one of these apps to learn French or whatever, so I can be a part of it. But we shall see what Risa Shea is going to do. Go check out Locked On Hawks to get more of your Risa Shea takes from Brad Rowland and whatnot. But Joe, again, thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, with an all 22 review, where we'll probably spend a good amount of time talking about the schematic changes and what was effective, and Kay Nellis as a pass rusher, all those various things we'll get into on tomorrow's Locked On Falcons. So continue to make us your first listen by subscribing and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL as your second listen, where you get 2 shows daily. Tyler Rowland, Tony Wiggins giving you the lowdown on what's going on with the other 31 NFL teams league-wide. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.